It would seem sensible that when you're doing teaching that involves demonstration of skills, that you'd really want to do it with a small number of students. The thought of doing that to, say, 100 plus students in a lecture theatre might well fill you with dread. How are you going to make sure that they can all see exactly what it is that you're doing? However, it's not impossible. Through the use of close camera work, you can actually show really clearly what it is that you want your students to be able to see by zooming in on what you're working on and then presenting that on a larger screen for everybody to see. You could even argue that that might be a better way of doing it, rather than trying to bring one or a couple of students in at a time and see individual components of what you're trying to do. One of the difficulties I find when I'm trying to do that is I'll say to a group of students, maybe 3 or 4, you're going to need to get closer to see what I'm doing, but they don't want to do that. And then even if they do come forward, I'll say, can you see what it is that I'm doing? And straight away they'll say yes, but I don't really know whether they can see or not. And I certainly don't know that they can see what I can see. And I cannot guarantee that everyone in the group can see the same thing. So when you're required to do demonstrations as part of your teaching, I really would like you to consider how best you could do that. There is definitely a place for live demonstration, for sure, and that you can adjust what you're doing in real time to suit your learners' needs. It also allows you to adapt the treatments that you're providing to suit specific patients. However, that method does certainly lose standardisation of teaching if you're going to have to repeat it or demonstrate the procedure several times to different groups. So think maybe, could you perhaps provide a recording from multiple angles or of various different technique options? There's also a definite benefit to the students to having a recorded demonstration available to them whilst they're actually doing the procedure, and they can follow along with it and stop it at certain points to see if they're managing to do it in exactly the same way as you have on the demonstration, rather than just trying to remember what they've just watched. So some people might even begin to wonder, do we even need a teacher there at all if we're not necessarily doing live real-time demonstrations? Well, we're certainly required to develop materials in the first place, and that is no small job. Sometimes students can feel it's a bit of a cop-out for us to provide recorded work. They might think it makes our job easier. But if they had any understanding of the amount of time and effort we put into preparing these materials, they would understand that it's certainly not a cop-out. Once the materials are developed, we always need to go back in and review them regularly to make sure they're the best they can be. Is that the most up-to-date way of doing it? Are we using the most up-to-date materials? And oftentimes we also need to take on board what our students have said, feedback about our recordings or about our materials, and adjusting it to suit their needs. The role of us as a teacher or a tutor will always be necessary for hands-on adjustments as students learn the techniques. We will all have been in the position where we knew what we were trying to do, but we just couldn't get our hands to actually do it. And that's where small group teaching is so vitally important to clinical education. We need to have the time to be able to observe our students and adjust what they're doing. So that it might involve a bit of verbal feedback. It might be us physically adjusting them. It might even be that we need to take over the procedure that they're doing for a period of time and demonstrate it again with that particular patient, and then letting the student try again. So ultimately, our role is to evaluate the student's learning and provide support individually as they need it. And to date, there is nothing that can replace us in that role, and I would argue that there probably never will be. The other thing to think about with small group teaching, or practical teaching certainly, is focus on breaking the complete task down into small individual steps. So as a qualified clinician, we can see that procedure as a whole. But if you try and think about back to the very first time you did it and how vast that procedure seemed. If I think about this from my personal perspective of dentistry, I'm at the point now where I would say, oh, I'm just going to cut a cavity in that tooth. But for the student, I would break that down into multiple small steps. So I might first of all say, let's locate the decay, and then we're going to access the decay by removing overlying tissue. Then we're going to remove any really soft decay. Then we're going to think about the activity of what's there, and so on and so forth. So that one cutting a cavity can come down to, say, maybe even 10 steps. Breaking it down into the small manageable tasks is really key to keeping students engaged and increasing their morale. What they're learning is really difficult, and they're very unlikely to be able to do the whole thing at once. But if they can do certain components well, they're less likely to feel so overwhelmed and this overarching feeling of, I'm never going to manage this. With that in mind, it's very important that we do not try to do too much at once. The quality of what our students is doing, the quality of their work, and having a true understanding of why they're doing it and what they're trying to achieve is so much more important than how often they've actually done the procedure from start to finish.